So here we are, a little under 2 months since the Nostalrius shut down, and now that the dust has settled a little bit, I feel the time is right to make this video. If you aren't familiar with the chain of events that happened, let me catch you up to speed. Nostalrius was a private vanilla WoW server launched in the spring of 2015, which far exceeded expectations. By April of 2016, Nostalrius had bloomed to over 150,000 active players, with peaks anywhere between 10,000 and 15,000 players on at any given time. There were even plans to release a Burning Crusade server to run alongside with the two vanilla servers that they were already running. Unfortunately, with fame also comes infamy, and in early April, a cease and desist letter along with a class action lawsuit were filed against the Nostalrius team, and on April 10th, the server was officially shut down. In a small glimmer of hope though, a petition was started and backed by former WoW lead Mark Kern. After reaching almost 264,000 signatures, the petition was hand-delivered by Mark himself, and from what it sounds like, the meeting between the two parties was very productive, as was the meeting between Blizzard and the Nostalrius team. And although there wasn't a definite yes or no, it was a start in the right direction for everyone who wants legacy servers to happen. Now, before I get into some of the pros and cons, I just want to give you my personal perspective. Would I like to see legacy servers? You bet your ass I do, and I would play the hell out of them. For me, I really enjoyed vanilla, but I loved Burning Crusade. The lore was exciting. The heroics and raids were challenging, yet rewarding. You had defined roles, but at the same time, most of the classes really started to open up, and although part of me did miss 40-man raids, another part of me felt that 10 and 25-mans were a pretty good balance. I'll always have great memories of the first time I set foot into Karazhan, or Gruul's Lair, my first Prince kill, or the first time I saw Nightbane land. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys have the same memories of Vanilla, Wrath, maybe killing Deathwing and Cataclysms, or that time in Warlords where you were sitting in your garrison and decided not to drink that gallon of bleach. As someone who's played on a lot of private servers though, I can promise you there are some great pros and some serious cons to the old style of WoW, some that you might not even be thinking of. So before we get into the concerns that I have, let's start this out on a positive note. The community that you remember, still there. Of course there are toxic people wherever you go, but a perfect example of this is the video playing in the background. This is a normal dungeon, on a character that I haven't touched for close to 2 years. To say that I am playing like crap is a complete understatement, yet the group overall was pretty supportive. No one seemed to mind that we wiped a couple of times, no one left the party, and no one got pissed that it took about 35 minutes for us to finish this dungeon. The reward factor is still there. If you put the effort in, you get the rewards out. And getting pre-raid best in slot is still as satisfying as you remember, assuming you were into that sort of thing like I was. My first and biggest concern though, is how is this going to work? Even the community seems pretty divided on this issue. Essentially, there are 3 options. Non-progression, non-gated, which essentially means you could start playing on a vanilla server with everything released all the way up to Naxx, Sunwell in Burning Crusade, or Icecrown Citadel in Wrath. This would also mean that if you decided to play on the Burning Crusade server after vanilla, you would have to start all the way over from scratch. No reputations, no gold, nothing. Option 2 is a progression gated, which basically means it would just be a relaunch of the old servers. You would get Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, followed by Ahn'Qiraj and Zul'Gurub, and eventually Naxx, before finally moving on to the Burning Crusade after either a set time period or perhaps progression numbers have been met. And the final option would be a non-progression transfer server, where essentially when you got bored with vanilla, you could create a mirror image of your character, lock, stock, and barreled on the Burning Crusade server, and eventually the Wrath server after you were bored there, but you wouldn't lose any of your previous characters. Obviously there's a downside to each of these. For example, if we did a progression-based server, what if you only liked vanilla? You wouldn't really have much of a choice when the quote-unquote new expansion came out, and you would be forced to move forward. On the opposite end of the spectrum, non-progression servers would run into the opposite problem of a stalemate. This actually becomes a big problem on a lot of the private servers, and I would imagine it would be the same thing on the legacy servers as well. It's kind of like riding a bike, you never really forget, so those of us who already got to experience a lot of these raids, we kind of know what classes we like to play, what classes are useful, how the boss fights work, and all the tricks and tips to get through the dungeons and raids quickly. People are going to progress through content much quicker than you realize because of this. Maybe not as quickly as retail, but you're going to have to realize there's going to be some really bad dead zones where people are bored either due to lack of content or just want to make other people mad. You think Stranglethorn Vale was bad in retail? You have no idea. I pity you if you try to play on a PvP server. Let's put it this way. When I was playing on Nostalrius, the ganking was so bad that it was actually quicker for me to go find some obscure area as far away from other people as possible as I could just to grind out some levels. I really worry that raiding is going to become a good old boys club also. The new players are going to want to see the WoW that they never got to experience, and they have every right to do so. And we, as the veteran players, are going to have to understand that this game is going to be revolutionarily different than the game they are accustomed to. They aren't going to understand threat mechanics or crowd control. They aren't going to understand slow progression and need before greed rules. It's not that they can't and won't learn, it's just that we have to understand that a lot of these players are as sick of the toxic environment that Resale has to offer also. I also worry that raid guilds are going to start mandating experienced-only application rules, which is really going to put off a lot of these players. How long until overgearing becomes mandatory? For those of you that played Wrath, you probably remember it. I don't know exactly when it started, but I do remember raiding Ulduar when I started seeing it. Looking for 2 healers, Nax 10, 5,000 gear score required. 5,000 gear score required for an instance that drops 4,000 gear? I've ran into this issue a few times myself, and it tends to happen on the servers that get older. People start requiring 1,800 bonus healing to run Karazhan, despite that in full Karazhan epics you might get 1,800 bonus healing. People start requiring tanks to have 14,000 health, despite the fact that you can't possibly hope to achieve that with pre-raid best in slot. Even the vanilla servers start running into these problems as well. I get that people don't want to struggle, and I do remember times where I would be healing on my priest and see a tank with 10,000 HP get invited to the group and just shudder a little bit, because I knew it was going to be a rough night. Making gold can be a real bitch, especially in vanilla. The problem was that most professions just weren't worth leveling, to most people at least. Blacksmithing, for example, can have some very nice patterns, but every single one of the items they produce is buy non-equip. Leveling the profession can cost you hundreds of gold and thousands more to grind the Thorium Brotherhood rep. Maybe you have a guild that will help you out. Great! But typically only one person gets that rep at a time, so for most people, leatherworking, blacksmithing, and tailoring are kind of a waste of time. Some professions like enchanting, engineering, and alchemy have their uses obviously, but typically the best professions to pick were the gathering professions. Most cloth, gems, leather sell for next to nothing on the auction house since there's so many people farming them and so little people crafting, and it means it can be very hard to get gold. Not all crafting materials are useless though, but again, the problem is everyone knows what these things are. Elemental earth and elemental fire, needed for nature and fire protection potions, were something that sold very well, but these spots are camped almost non-stop. Gold farmers are literally pissing themselves for these servers to come back, as the token system has all but killed their business. Add on the fact that gold is a pain in the ass to farm, and I think we can expect to see these guys back in full force. I suppose it is possible that Blizzard could do the token system at a reduced cost on these legacy servers, but I gotta be honest, I don't know how I feel about that. Everyone already knows where the good stuff is already, so there won't be much of a mystery. I love tanking and healing, and it was basically all I did in Burning Crusade. I was also an armor smith on my warrior, which meant I got to make a pretty cool DPS chest piece, which I rarely used except for farming. Given a do-over, I would probably choose something like engineering so that I could get the helmet. Once I got that, mining kind of becomes obsolete. So I may choose the level enchanting, so that way I can enchant my rings. And I'm sure I won't be the only one doing this. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but part of what made this game so great back then was the mystery of exploration. Well, to put it bluntly, been there, done that. The last issue is, if we get these legacy servers, is it going to open up a lot of other doors and create a lot of problems for Blizzard? If we get them, how much longer until people start asking for Cataclysm, Pandaria, and WoD legacy servers? If everyone got to play on the server of their choice, they might not have too much incentive to buy the expansion. Although in all honesty, most people aren't playing retail at this point anyways, so I don't know how much impact it would really have on their sales. What about the people that don't want to go backwards? Some people just want to move forward, and I think that there are a couple interesting options left for Blizzard. People have been asking for a South Seas expansion for years, and I think an expansion revolving around the Emerald Dream could do very well. But if people end up turtling up on a Wrath server, would these expansions ever get made? Overall, I think that legacy servers could add some much needed revenue back into Blizzard's coffers, and if they were to do a collector's edition to help offset the cost of making it, I myself would have no problem paying $39 or whatever to help get it going. And I'm sure there are a lot of others out there who feel the same way. What would be nice is if they took this money and started funneling it into a new MMO. So do I think that they are a good idea? Yes, when you look at how quickly the subscriptions are fading, you really need to do something to keep it up. And although I still believe this is just a temporary fix, and I really wish they would put some effort into fixing retail, I think legacy servers would be a good short-term compromise, and who knows, maybe if they get a really positive reaction, they might consider bringing back some of the old traits that made this game so great into the next expansion, assuming there is one. But I'd kind of like to know what you guys think. Would you be excited if legacy servers came out? And which style would you prefer to play on? Thanks for checking out the video. It's been a pleasure, and as always, take it easy. Alpha out.